The rain did not fall so much as it laid siege. It came down in cold, determined sheets that turned the rutted country road into a ribbon of black mud and swallowed the sound of hooves as if the world itself wished to hush any witness. In such weather, even the proudest carriage learned humility. Wheels sank, horses balked, and travellers discovered that rank did not bargain with a storm. That was how Amelia Hartwood found herself on foot, with her cloak pulled tight at the throat, her bonnet strings cutting faintly into her jaw, one gloved hand clenched around a valise that had belonged to her mother, and the other bracing against the wind. She learned long ago to measure her pride in useful units. Pride could not buy a dry bed. Pride could not coax a coachman to risk a flooded ford. Pride, in the end, could not keep grief from hollowing a home, nor debt from taking it. She had taken what remained of her dignity and fitted it to her circumstances the way one might refit an old gown. Turned seams, let down a hem, stitched in patience where silk once lay. No title rested on her name, no father's protection remained. He had gone to ground in the churchyard 2 years past, leaving only a thin legacy of respectability and a thicker stack of unpaid accounts. Amelia had paid what she could, apologized for what she could not, and learned to smile without inviting familiarity. It was a delicate education, and she had studied it as seriously as any young lady once studied music. She had not intended to be on this road at all. Her aunt, her only relation with both means and temper, had summoned her to the estate in Berkshire, where she kept house for a widowed brother-in-law and ruled the servants with the satisfaction of one born to command. The letter, written in an impatient hand, had promised a situation for Amelia, as though one might be found like a dropped glove. It had also included a warning: arrive before the week's end, or do not trouble to arrive at all. Amelia, who had learned that even unkind shelter was still shelter, had obeyed, but the coach from London had been stopped by rising water and a driver unwilling to drown his team. They had let passengers down near the last village and told them to make their own arrangements. Some had found rooms. Some had sent for private conveyances. Amelia had spent what she could spare on a single night beneath a thatched-in roof, then set out again when the rain eased, only to have it return with renewed vigour before noon. Now dusk pressed close, and the countryside had become a blur of hedgerow and wet fields. Her boots were ruined. Her fingers ached. Her valise grew heavier with each step, as though it took on water and sorrow both. She nearly walked past the lane. It was no more than a break in the hedge, a narrow track leading away from the main road toward a stand of trees. Only when lightning tore the sky and revealed a low stone wall beyond did she see it, a small structure at the far end, squat and sturdy, its roof slanting like a shoulder turned against the storm. A keeper's cottage, perhaps, or a hunting lodge. Whatever it was, it promised 4 walls and a door. She hesitated. In the last 2 years, hesitation had become a habit. The world had taught her that a woman alone must account for every threshold she crossed. Yet the alternative was the open road and the dark. She adjusted her bonnet, lifted her chin, and made for the lane. By the time she reached the door, she could no longer feel the tips of her ears. Her glove had torn at the thumb, and rain had found the gap, stinging the skin beneath. She rapped once, then again, then pressed her forehead briefly against the wood as if gathering strength from it. No answer. She tried the latch. It yielded under her hand. The door opened into a narrow entry, and then a larger room beyond, dim but unmistakably occupied. A fire burned low in a stone hearth. The scent of wet wool and wood smoke mingled, and somewhere in the back of the cottage a kettle began to sing in a faint, hopeful way. A man stood near the hearth with his back half-turned, his coat draped over a chair as though he had only just arrived himself. He turned at the sound of the door. For an instant, the storm's roar filled the silence between them. The man's face came into view in the firelight, sharp-boned with an aristocrat's clean lines, though the rain had loosened his hair and darkened it into a disordered sweep at his temples. His eyes, a cool grey that might have belonged to seastone, narrowed in appraisal, then widened, less with surprise at her presence than with a kind of quick, practiced calculation. Amelia felt the familiar tightening at the base of her throat. A lone gentleman in a cottage in a storm. Impropriety had teeth. "I beg your pardon," she said, and forced steadiness into her voice. "I believed this house unoccupied. The door was not latched." "It wasn't," he said. His voice carried that particular restraint that came from being used to being listened to. You are soaked through. I am, she agreed, because there was no sense denying what her dripping cloak made plain. If you would permit me a moment by the fire, I will trouble you no longer than necessary. The road is impassable. His gaze slid over her, her worn but carefully mended cloak, the plain bonnet, the valise held close as if it were a shield. He did not leer. That in itself was not quite comfort. It made him harder to read. You may come in, he said at last, as if granting access to something more guarded than a cottage. Close the door. The wind will steal the heat. Amelia stepped inside and shut the door behind her. The cottage felt smaller with the two of them in it. She kept her distance, moving toward the hearth with cautious steps. Heat reached for her like a hand, and she almost sighed. Only then did she notice the other signs: a saddle near the wall, a riding crop, a damp hat set carefully atop a chest. A gentleman travelling alone, then. Not a keeper, not a servant. The cottage was likely meant for someone of his sort. I did not mean to intrude, she said again, because the words were armour and habit. If there is a family— There is no family here, he answered. Not tonight. Something in the way he said it, flat, final, made her look up. His expression had settled into a kind of guarded calm. He was not young, though not old. Perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two more. The sort of man who had learned to wear self-command as a second coat, even when wet and weary. And you? He asked. What are you doing on this road alone? Amelia had learned, too, that truth required careful portioning. I am travelling to Berkshire, she said, to my aunt's home. That is not an answer, he said, but his tone remained even. It is the only one you are entitled to, she replied before she could stop herself. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes, quick as flame. It vanished just as swiftly. I suppose I deserve that, he said. The road is no place for a lady without escort. I'm not entirely without escort, she said, and did not add that her escort was necessity. He glanced at the valise. Does it speak? Amelia surprised herself with a small, genuine laugh. It felt odd in her chest, as though laughter had become a room she seldom entered. No, she said, but it does weigh enough to argue. He nodded as if conceding the point. Then, with a motion that was neither intimate nor dismissive, he gestured toward a chair near the fire. Sit, you're shivering. She was, though she had tried to will herself into stillness. Her body had never been able to lie as convincingly as her face. She sat, keeping her back straight, hands folded atop her valise. The firelight threw shifting shadows across the room. On a shelf above the hearth sat a few battered books and an empty decanter. A hunting print hung crooked on the wall. The cottage was plain, but it had been maintained. Someone cared for it, at least enough to keep it ready. The man crossed to the kettle, poured steaming water into a cup, and set it on the table near her. Tea, he said, of a sort. Amelia stared at it, as though it might be a trick. Then she lifted it carefully, warmed her fingers against the porcelain, and took a sip. It was weak, but it was hot. Thank you, she said. He did not sit. He paced once, then stopped near the window, looking out at the darkness as if trying to see through it. You can't, she said softly. He turned. The road, she clarified. No one can see through this. Not even a duke. The words escaped her with no intention behind them, as though some part of her had recognized him before her mind would admit it. The shock of her own boldness made her cheeks warm. His stillness confirmed the truth. He did not ask how she knew. He did not deny it. His gaze sharpened, not with anger but with a heightened awareness, as if the board had shifted beneath a chess piece. You have met me? He asked. No, Amelia said, and shook her head. But you carry yourself as though the world steps aside for you. A faint, humorless curve touched his mouth. It usually does. Amelia set the cup down, suddenly conscious of the chair's proximity to the fire's proximity to him, the entire closeness of a cottage that had not expected two. I meant no offense, she said. I'm rarely offended by accuracy, he replied. And you are? She considered giving a false name. She could easily. She had practice at making herself smaller, less noticeable, less memorable. But something in the way he watched her, alert, appraising, weary, made her choose the truth. Perhaps it was that a duke, of all people, might not care enough to use it against her, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion. "Amelia Hartwood." He repeated it once, as if testing the sound. "Hartwood," he said. "Not a name I know." "No," she said. "It is not a name that opens doors." His eyes flicked to hers. For a moment she wondered if he understood more than she intended. Then the kettle hissed again, and the cottage returned to its small, practical life. "Frederick Hulston," he said, "Duke of Valemont." So the rumours had been true. Valemont, the ancient house whose lands lay in the north, whose title was spoken with the sort of reverence reserved for old cathedrals and old money. Amelia had once read of him in the society pages, when her mother still lived, and such things still seemed like stories rather than fences. A duke who had inherited young, whose mother had died not long after, whose father had been remembered as severe. A duke rumoured to be on the brink of an alliance with a family even richer than his own. She lowered her gaze, because that was what one did in the presence of rank, though she had never quite managed the instinct. "Your Grace." He inclined his head, not quite a bow. "Miss Hartwood." Outside thunder rolled, and the cottage trembled in response. A gust of wind drove rain hard against the window, and for a moment the glass seemed to shudder like a living thing. Frederick looked toward the door again, and Amelia saw, beneath his composure, an edge of tension. Not fear of the storm. He did not strike her as a man who feared weather, but fear of what the weather might force. "You were walking," he said. "Where is your carriage?" "I had none," Amelia replied. "None at all." "No." His jaw tightened slightly. "Then you were sent alone." "I sent myself," she said, though it was only partly true. "I had no other option." He did not respond at once. The silence stretched, filled by the rain and the soft crackle of the fire. "Options," he said finally, almost to himself. "It's remarkable how little they mean when circumstance decides otherwise." Amelia watched him, curiosity stirring despite caution. Dukes did not usually speak of circumstance as though it were a tyrant. They were the tyrants, at least in the stories told by those outside their walls. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "if you have servants nearby." "I do," he said. "Not here. My horse threw a shoe near the ford. The nearest village had a smith who promised help by morning if the water falls." His mouth tightened again. "Until then, I am as trapped as you." Trapped. The word fell into the cottage like a dropped coin. It made her suddenly aware of the rules that governed her life, rules that had been stitched into her bones. Never be alone with a gentleman, never be found under the same roof without chaperone, never give anyone reason to speak your name with a smirk. Those rules had been designed to protect women like her, but they had also been designed to control them. And in the end, rules did not keep rain from falling. She rose, unable to sit with the knowledge pressing against her. "Then I should go," she said. "It is not proper for a duke to share shelter with a woman," he asked, and his tone held a faint, bitter edge. "Or for a woman to share shelter with a duke." Amelia stiffened. "For an unmarried woman to spend the night in the same cottage as an unmarried man," he studied her. "You intend to go back into the storm." "I intend to preserve what little reputation I have," she answered, and heard how bleak it sounded. Frederick's gaze moved over her again, this time taking in the tremor in her hands, the water dripping from her hem, the pallor around her mouth that spoke of fatigue. "You won't make it to the village before dark," he said. "I made it here." "By luck," he replied, "and stubbornness." She felt irritation spark, familiar, unwelcome, but real. "And you would have me do what, Your Grace? Sit by your fire and pretend it is all perfectly acceptable?" He turned away, as if the argument cost him effort. He dragged a hand through his damp hair. For a moment, the image of him from the society pages, polished, distant, fell away, and what remained was a man worn thin by obligations that did not pause for storms. "You believe I want this?" he asked quietly. Amelia faltered. "I did not say—" "I have spent my life being told what is acceptable," he went on, voice low. "What is expected? What must be done to keep a name intact?" He looked at her then, and the intensity of his attention made the room feel smaller still. "Do you know what it is, Miss Hartwood, to have your very breathing weighed against a legacy?" Amelia's first instinct was to deny his comparison, to insist that his burdens were gilded. Yet something in his eyes stopped her. It was not self-pity. It was the particular exhaustion of someone trapped inside a role too big to step out of. "I know," she said slowly, "what it is to be weighed, not as a person, as a problem." His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Recognition, perhaps. The cottage door rattled suddenly as wind struck it. Amelia flinched. The sound reminded her too sharply of other doors, of creditors knocking, of neighbours murmuring. She had always been one knock away from disgrace. Tonight she was one roof away from it. Frederick crossed to the door and tested the latch with a practiced hand. "It will hold," he said, more to the room than to her. Then, after a pause, he added, "You may take the bed." Amelia blinked. The bed. He gestured toward a narrow doorway at the back. "There is one. I will take the chair." "That is unnecessary," she said quickly. "I cannot accept—" "You can," he interrupted, and there was command in it, the kind that made servants move. Then he softened, as if remembering she was not bound to obey him. "You look half dead with cold. I won't have it on my conscience that you fell ill because I insisted on propriety." Her pride rose again, stubborn as ever. "My health is not your responsibility." "Tonight it is," he said simply, "because my roof is the only one available." It was an odd way of claiming ownership, my roof, when it was a hunting cottage in the middle of nowhere. Yet perhaps for a man like him, shelter was always his by inheritance, by expectation. Amelia felt the weight of that, the distance between them, and at the same time, the strange equality forced by the storm. She hesitated, then nodded once. "Very well," she said, because she was cold and tired and because refusing kindness out of pride had never improved her circumstances. Frederick moved with a kind of restrained efficiency, stirring the fire, hanging her cloak near enough to dry, offering her a blanket from a chest. He did not touch her. He kept his distance in a way that suggested conscious choice. Amelia took the blanket. Her fingers brushed the rough wool and trembled. She did not know whether the tremor came from cold or from the awareness of how thin the line was between safety and scandal. "For you should remove your wet shoes," he said, and his tone turned almost brusque as if kindness embarrassed him. Amelia's cheeks warmed again. "I am capable of tending to myself." "I don't doubt it," he replied, and something in his voice, respect perhaps, made her pause. "But capability does not prevent frostbite." She gave him a look that might have been annoyance, might have been reluctant gratitude, then turned toward the back room with the blanket and her valise held close. The bed was narrow, the coverlet plain. A small window looked out into darkness, rain streaking the glass like tears. Amelia set her valise on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, suddenly uncertain. She had accepted the bed, yes, but sleep was another matter. How could she sleep with a duke in the next room? How could she sleep with her future balanced on a rumour? She removed her shoes and rubbed her feet, wincing at the raw spots. When she stood, the room tilted slightly. Fatigue and hunger made her lightheaded. She lay down fully clothed, blanket pulled over her, and stared at the ceiling beams. In the other room, Frederick moved about, the creak of floorboards marking his steps. At some point he spoke, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the fire. His words were muffled. Amelia closed her eyes and tried to let the storm's rhythm lull her. But memory did not lull. It sharpened. She remembered her mother's voice, gentle but firm, instructing her in the ways of women who had little power. "We must be careful, Amelia," she had said. "We must always be careful. Society forgives men their storms, but not women. Careful, always careful." Yet tonight, careful had not been enough to keep her from this cottage, this roof, this duke. She heard Frederick stop moving. Silence settled. Then, quietly, the back room door creaked. Amelia's eyes snapped open. She sat up, heart hammering. Frederick stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame as though he did not trust himself to step farther. The firelight from the main room touched his face from behind, leaving his features half in shadow. He did not look like a man seeking advantage. He looked like a man on the brink of a decision he had resisted for too long. "I won't come in," he said, voice low. We need to speak." Amelia tightened her grip on the blanket. "About what?" "About what will happen when morning comes," he replied, her stomach clenched. "In the morning I will leave. I will go to my aunt's and—" "And if someone saw you come here?" he asked. "No one did," she said quickly. "You don't know that," he countered. "The smith in the village may talk. A groom might ride out at first light and find 2 sets of tracks. Someone might have noticed you on the road. People notice what amuses them." Amelia swallowed. She knew the truth of it. Scandal was rarely born of certainty. It fed on suggestion. "What do you want from me, Your Grace?" she demanded, and the sharpness of it surprised her. But fear made blades of words. "Do you intend to threaten me into silence? I have no interest in your secrets." His eyes flashed. "I am not threatening you." "Then why are you standing there?" she asked. "Why are you speaking of what someone might say?" He exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "Because someone is already poised to say it about me." Amelia's brow furrowed. "About you." Frederick stepped back into the main room, and after a moment Amelia rose and followed, keeping the blanket around her shoulders like a barrier. She stopped near the doorway, unwilling to cross fully into the room where the fire made everything too intimate. Frederick stood near the hearth, staring into the flames as though they held answers. "I am to be married," he said, and the words fell like stones. Amelia felt something twist in her chest, not jealousy, not yet, but the ache of understanding. Of course he was. Dukes were always to be married. Their lives were stitched to alliances and heirs and the continuation of names that had existed long before any single man carrying them. "I have heard," Amelia said, "because honesty cost less than pretense. In London." His mouth tightened. "Then you know it is considered settled." "I know society considers many things settled," she replied, "even before the people involved have spoken." A short, humorless laugh escaped him. If only that were the worst of it. He turned then, and Amelia saw the strain in his face more clearly, the tightness at the corners of his eyes, the controlled set of his shoulders. "The alliance," he said, "is with the Ashfords. My solicitor calls it necessary. My uncle calls it prudent. My tenants call it salvation, though they would not use the word." He paused. "I call it a cage." Amelia did not know what to say to that. Sympathy for a duke felt like a strange indulgence, yet the despair in his voice was unmistakably human. "You could refuse," she said softly. He looked at her as if she had offered a child's solution to a war. "Refuse, and watch every person who depends upon Valemont suffer the consequences. Refuse and invite Parliament's whispers about my debt. Refuse, and prove every rumour about my incompetence true." His jaw worked. "Refusal is not a luxury afforded to me." Amelia's fingers tightened on the blanket. She understood duty in her own way. She had paid debts not of her making. She had swallowed pride to keep a roof over her head. Yet his duty was a machine that crushed more than just him. "And tonight?" she asked. "What does tonight have to do with that?" Frederick's gaze held hers. "Everything," he said. The storm seemed to lean closer, pressing rain against the cottage, urging confession. "My betrothed's brother," Frederick said, "is not a kind man. He has made it his sport to collect evidence of other people's failings. He believes it gives him leverage." His eyes darkened. "He believes I am vulnerable to scandal." Amelia's throat tightened. "And you are?" Frederick did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the table and picked up a folded paper she had not noticed before. He held it between 2 fingers, as though it disgusted him. "This was delivered to me in London," he said. An anonymous note. It suggested with considerable vulgarity that I have grown tired of my impending marriage and might be persuaded to amuse myself with someone unconnected. His gaze flicked to Amelia. "Someone like you." Amelia felt heat rush to her face, a mixture of indignation and humiliation. "I beg your pardon?" "I did not write it," Frederick said sharply, and then quieter, "but the intent is clear. They want me compromised before the marriage. If I appear dishonourable, the Ashfords can demand more, or withdraw and leave me ruined." He clenched the paper. "Tonight was not supposed to happen, but now that it has, now that you are here, there is a possibility they will try to use it." Amelia's mind raced. She saw it as clearly as if it were already being whispered in a drawing room. The Duke of Valemont found overnight, with a young woman of no title, a woman desperate enough to be alone on the road. The insinuations would right themselves. "I will leave before dawn," she said quickly. "No one will see me." Frederick shook his head once. "You think that will protect you? Or me?" "It might," Amelia insisted, though doubt trembled beneath her words. He stared into the fire again, and when he spoke his voice had changed, lower, heavier, as if he had crossed some internal line. "There is one way," he said, "to ensure no one can turn tonight into a weapon." Amelia's breath caught. "What way?" He did not look at her when he answered, as though he could not bear to witness her reaction. "I could marry you." The cottage went still. Even the rain seemed to pause for a heartbeat before resuming its relentless fall. Amelia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "That is impossible," she whispered. Frederick turned then. The firelight caught his eyes, making them look almost silver, and in them Amelia saw something dangerous, not lust, not cruelty, but a fierce, desperate resolve. "Nothing is impossible," he said, "only unthinkable." Amelia's hands went numb. "You have never spoken to me before tonight. You do not know me." "I know enough," he replied, and there was a strange intensity in his tone, as if he had been forced into clarity. "I know you are alone. I know you have pride, and that you are not easily cowed. I know you would rather freeze on the road than be thought indecent. That tells me more about your character than a season of introductions." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Your Grace, you are to be married to another woman." He flinched slightly, as if the reminder struck a bruise. "I am to be," he said, "and I despise it. This marriage would free me from that alliance. It would rob the Ashfords of their leverage. It would silence anyone who dares suggest I took liberties tonight." His voice roughened. "It would also ruin you, if you refuse and they speak anyway." Amelia's stomach turned. She could see the trap from both sides. If she said no, she returned to her precarious life and risked being branded a scandalous adventuress. If she said yes, she stepped into a world that would never truly accept her, bound to a man who offered marriage not as devotion, but as defense. "It is an impronunciable proposal," she said, the Portuguese phrase shaping itself into English in her mind as something unspeakable. "No decent man would offer it. No sensible woman would accept it." Frederick's mouth tightened. "I am not offering decency. I am offering survival." "And what of affection?" Amelia asked, surprising herself. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "What of choice? Am I to be nothing but your shield?" For the first time, Frederick looked openly pained. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that I cannot allow them to destroy Valemont, and I cannot—" He stopped, and something in his throat worked as if the words were hard. "I cannot pretend I did not see you tonight. The way you spoke to me, the way you stood your ground. It has been a long time since anyone did." Amelia's heart thudded slow and heavy. In that confession, she heard loneliness, not the romantic sort painted in novels, but the real, grinding loneliness of a life lived under scrutiny, where every conversation carried an angle, every smile carried calculation. She stepped closer to the fire without meaning to, drawn by warmth, by the strange gravity of truth. "You do not want to marry me," she said quietly. Frederick's gaze lowered to her hands, clutching the blanket. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I know what I must do, and tonight has made the distinction unbearable." Amelia looked at the flames. They did not care who fed them. They consumed whatever was offered. "If I agreed," she said slowly, "I would become the Duchess of Valemont." "Yes." "I would be hated," she whispered, "by your peers, by the woman you were meant to marry, by anyone who believes I trapped you." He did not deny it. "Yes," he said again, harsher now, "and you would never be lonely again." The words struck harder than any threat. Amelia had learned to live with loneliness, to treat it like a cold room one endured. Yet the idea of never being lonely, of having a place that could not be taken by a creditor's letter, of having a name that could not be brushed aside, made her pulse race. And yet. She looked at Frederick then, really looked, and saw not only the Duke, but the man beneath the title. He was offering her a life and a prison at once. He was offering himself as protection, and using her as protection in return. It was transaction, yes, but it was also, she could not deny it, an invitation into a truth he rarely spoke aloud. How would it be done? She asked, and heard the faint shift in her own voice, as though the question carried her across a threshold she could not uncross. Frederick's eyes sharpened. There is a chapel on the Valemont estate. A clergyman in my employ. If we reach the village by morning, I can send word. We could be married quietly within days. Quietly? Amelia repeated, though she knew nothing involving a duke was ever truly quiet. It would become public soon enough, he said, but by then it would be done. Amelia's thoughts tangled. She imagined her aunt's face, pinched with outrage, then bright with sudden ambition. She imagined the whispers of neighbors who had once offered condolences and now would offer envy. She imagined stepping into a ballroom and feeling eyes rake over her like knives. She imagined, too, a lifetime spent beside a man who might never truly want her, who might always see her as the storm's solution. "You are asking me," she said, "to risk my honor." Frederick's gaze held hers. "I am asking you," he corrected, "to decide what your honor is worth to a society that will never value you properly." The words should have angered her. Instead, they landed with the weight of truth. Society had never valued her properly. It had valued her only in relation to men, first as a daughter, then as a potential wife, then as a poor relation sent from one house to another. Amelia had been respectable, yes, but respectability had not saved her from hunger or cold, and Frederick, for all his rank, sounded as trapped as she was, only by different chains. Outside, thunder cracked so sharply the cottage seemed to shudder. The fire flared. For a moment, light filled every corner, revealing them both as they truly were, two people stranded, stripped of the usual distance between their worlds, forced to reckon with what they might become to each other. Amelia breathed in, slowly. She could smell smoke, damp wool, and something faintly sharp from Frederick's coat, leather and rain. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "If you marry me," she said, "will you resent me?" Frederick's expression tightened. He looked away as if the question struck too close. Then he returned his gaze to hers with a steadiness that felt like the first truly honest thing between them. "I would resent the world that left us no gentler option," he said. "But you." He paused. "I don't think I am capable of resenting you. Not when you look at me as if I am merely a man." Amelia's throat tightened. She did not trust herself to speak at once. "And you," he added, voice lower, "would you hate me?" Amelia's hands trembled slightly. "I would be afraid," she admitted, "and perhaps angry, but I have hated enough people in my life already. It has never fed me. It has never warmed me." She swallowed. "I don't think I could hate you if you were honest with me." Frederick stared at her. Something shifted in him, subtle but real, as if her words had reached a place in him long denied nourishment. The fire popped, scattering sparks. Amelia flinched. Frederick moved instinctively, not toward her in a way that presumed intimacy, but in a way that offered protection without claiming ownership. He stopped himself before closing the distance fully, as if remembering the precariousness of every inch between them. His restraint was, strangely, the most intimate thing he had done all evening. "You should sleep," he said, voice rougher now. "And you should not make proposals you might regret in daylight," Amelia replied, though there was no accusation in it, only warning. Frederick's mouth tightened, but not in anger. "Daylight has never been kinder to me than night," he said. "At least the dark admits what it is." Amelia looked toward the back room. Sleep felt impossible, yet her body sagged with exhaustion. She could not think clearly if she remained awake, caught in fear and flame. "I will consider what you said," she told him, and heard how fragile it sounded, like a promise made on thin ice. Frederick nodded once. "That is all I ask," he said. Then, after a pause that carried more weight than his title, he added, "Whatever you decide, I will see you safely to the village." Amelia turned away, blanket tight around her shoulders, and returned to the narrow bed. As she lay down, the storm's sound seemed to fill her ears, but beneath it was the echo of his words. Survival, legacy, loneliness. In the other room, Frederick sat by the fire. Amelia could sense him there, as one senses a presence even through walls. She wondered what he saw when he stared into the flames. She wondered if he regretted speaking, or if he feared the silence more. Sleep did not come quickly. When it did, it came in fragments, her mother's face fading, her father's hands ink-stained from ledgers, her aunt's cold voice, Frederick's eyes in firelight, looking at her as if she mattered. Sometime in the night, the rain softened, though it did not stop. Amelia woke once to the sound of Frederick moving quietly, replenishing the fire. She lay still, listening, and in that stillness she recognized something she had not expected to find here. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. Morning would demand an answer. Morning would pull them back into the world and its rules. But the night, this single night, had already bent something in both of them, like a branch forced by wind into a new shape. Some storms did not pass. They rewrote the land. They rewrote lives. And in the pale hours before dawn, with rain whispering against the cottage and a duke sitting guard by the fire, Amelia Hartwood realized she was no longer merely traveling toward her aunt's house. She was traveling toward a choice that could erase her or remake her. And Frederick Halston, Duke of Valemont, who had been trained his entire life to treat choice as illusion, waited in the next room for a woman with no title to decide whether she would become his salvation or his ruin. Dawn came reluctantly, as though the sky itself had reservations about what daylight might reveal. Amelia woke to the sound of Frederick moving in the other room, quiet, deliberate sounds that suggested he had been awake for some time. The cottage felt different in the grey morning light, less intimate perhaps, or more honest. The fire had burned low, and through the narrow window she could see the storm had gentled into a steady drizzle that blurred the landscape into soft edges. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping in her clothes. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the night, and she gathered it with trembling fingers, aware that she looked nothing like a woman who might become a duchess. She looked instead like what she was, a traveller caught between destinations, wearing yesterday's dignity. When she emerged from the back room, Frederick stood near the hearth with his coat already on, his expression unreadable. He had the look of a man who had spent the night wrestling decisions and reached an uneasy truce with them. His eyes found hers immediately, and in that glance Amelia felt the weight of the question neither had yet spoken aloud in daylight. "The rain has eased," he said, as if reporting weather were safer than acknowledging what lay beneath it. "So I see," Amelia replied. A silence opened between them, vast and careful. Frederick broke it first. "I meant what I said last night," he told her. Every word. Amelia's hands tightened on the edge of her cloak, which she had retrieved from where it hung near the fire. The fabric was still damp in places, but warmer than it had been. She wondered if he had tended it while she slept, adjusting its position to catch more heat. The thought made her chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. "I know you did," she said quietly. "And?" His voice held a tension that reminded her he was not as certain as he pretended. Amelia looked at him, really looked, and saw the man who had offered her survival wrapped in a proposal that should never have been made. She saw the Duke who despised the alliance that awaited him. She saw the loneliness he had confessed to in firelight, and beneath all of it, she saw something she had not expected. Hope. Not for love, perhaps. Not yet. But for something other than the grinding machinery of duty and debt. "I have a question first," Amelia said. Frederick nodded once, granting permission. "If I say yes," she began, choosing her words with the care of someone stepping across ice, "what happens to the woman you were meant to marry? Will she be humiliated?" Frederick's jaw tightened. "She will be relieved," he said, and there was a bitter edge to it. "Catherine Ashford does not wish to marry me any more than I wish to marry her. She told me as much at our last meeting, though she phrased it with the politeness required of her station." His eyes darkened. "It is her brother and my uncle who arranged this. She is as much a pawn as I am." Amelia absorbed this. It did not entirely ease her conscience, but it shifted the equation. If Catherine Ashford was trapped too, then perhaps Amelia's acceptance was not theft but mutual liberation, or at least a different kind of cage for everyone involved. "And your uncle?" she asked. "He will be furious." "He will," Frederick agreed, "but my uncle does not hold the title. I do. His fury will exhaust itself eventually, and he will adjust. He always does." There was no affection in his tone when he spoke of family, only a weary pragmatism. Amelia looked toward the window. Outside, the countryside emerged from the storm's veil, green and clean and indifferent to human complications. She thought of her aunt waiting in Berkshire, of the situation that had been promised, likely a position as governess or companion, something respectable and suffocating. She thought of the life she had been travelling toward, small, safe, silent. Then she thought of what Frederick offered, perilous, public, impossibly strange. A life that would require her to learn how to be someone she had never imagined becoming. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I want honesty between us. Not performance, not pretense for the sake of society. When we are alone, I want the truth." Frederick's gaze sharpened. "You have it." "And I want time," she continued, gaining strength from the firmness in her own voice. "I know this must be done quickly, but I will not be rushed into a role I don't understand. If I am to be your Duchess, I will learn it at my own pace." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Agreed." Amelia drew a breath. Her heart hammered so hard she thought he must hear it. "Then I will marry you, Your Grace." The words fell into the cottage and changed its air. Frederick went very still, as though he had not fully believed she would say them. Then his shoulders shifted slightly, tension releasing in a way that made him look younger, less burdened. "Frederick," he said. Amelia blinked. "I beg your pardon." "My name," he clarified. "If we are to be married, you should use it, at least when we are alone." It was such a small thing, yet it felt monumental. Amelia tested the shape of it in her mind before speaking aloud. "Frederick." He inclined his head, and for the first time since she had met him, a faint, genuine smile touched his mouth. It was brief, gone almost before she could register it, but it altered his face entirely. He looked for an instant like a man who might still remember how to be happy. "We should leave soon," he said, practicality reasserting itself. "The village is 3 miles. If we reach it before midday, I can send word to Valemont and arrange for the chaplain." Amelia nodded, though her stomach twisted. 3 miles. A chaplain. A marriage that would bind her to a man she had known for less than 12 hours. It was madness. It was necessity. It was both. Frederick moved toward the door, then paused. "Amelia," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice was careful, as though he were learning it. "I will not make promises I cannot keep, but I will promise you this. I will not treat you as less than you are. Whatever else I fail at, I will not fail you in that." Amelia's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she did not know what she was, that she had spent the last 2 years feeling like a fading sketch of her former self, but instead she said, "That is enough." It was not. But it was a start. They left the cottage together as the rain dwindled to mist. Frederick locked the door behind them with a key he produced from his coat, as if sealing away the night they had shared. Amelia walked beside him along the muddy lane, her valise lighter now that he insisted on carrying it, though she had protested. The road stretched ahead, no longer menacing, merely wet and endless. They did not speak much on the walk. Words felt unnecessary, or perhaps too dangerous. Instead, they moved in a shared rhythm, adjusting their pace to match each other's. When Amelia stumbled on a loose stone, Frederick's hand shot out to steady her elbow, then withdrew immediately as if the contact burned. She felt the absence of his touch more acutely than the touch itself. The village emerged from the mist like a sketch gaining detail. It was small, the sort of place where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were noted before they reached the first house. Amelia saw curtains twitch as they passed. She kept her chin high and her expression neutral, though her pulse raced. Frederick led her directly to the inn, a tidy, whitewashed building with a painted sign that creaked in the breeze. He opened the door for her, and they stepped into a low-ceilinged room that smelled of bread and ale. A woman behind the counter looked up, her expression shifting rapidly from professional courtesy to sharp curiosity as she took in Frederick's bearing and Amelia's dishevelled state. "Your Grace," the woman said, dropping into a curtsy so quick it was almost reflexive. "We did not expect, that is, the weather—" "I require a private room," Frederick interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that did not invite conversation. "And a boy to ride to Valemont with a message." The innkeeper's wife, Amelia assumed that was who she was, nodded rapidly. "Of course, Your Grace, at once." Her eyes slid to Amelia, bright with questions she would not dare ask. Frederick did not introduce Amelia. That omission was deliberate, Amelia realized. To name her now would only fuel speculation. Better to let the innkeeper wonder until the marriage made speculation irrelevant. They were shown to a small parlour upstairs where a fire had already been lit. The innkeeper's wife promised tea and withdrew, though Amelia could feel the woman's curiosity like a living thing pressing against the closed door. Frederick crossed to the desk and pulled out paper and ink. He wrote swiftly, his handwriting bold and certain. When he finished, he sealed the letter with wax and his signet ring, then called for the boy, who appeared within moments, a gap-toothed lad who stared at Frederick with awe and at Amelia with frank curiosity. "Ride to Valemont," Frederick instructed, handing over the letter and a coin that made the boy's eyes widen. "Give this directly to Mr. Graves, the steward, no one else. Tell him the Duke requires his immediate attendance here, along with the chaplain. Can you remember that?" The boy nodded so hard Amelia thought his head might come loose. "Good. Go." The boy fled. Frederick turned back to Amelia, who had taken a seat near the fire. She felt strange sitting in a room that was not quite public, not quite private, with a man who was not quite a stranger, but not quite familiar. The rules of propriety had already been bent beyond recognition. Now they waited to be rewritten entirely. "It will take him 2 hours to reach Valemont and my steward, perhaps another 2 to prepare and return," Frederick said. "We have time." Time. The word felt both too much and too little. Amelia looked at her hands, still faintly numb from the cold. Time for what? Frederick sat in the chair across from her, and in the daylight she saw the exhaustion around his eyes more clearly. He had not slept, she realized. He had kept watch all night. "Time to change your mind," he said. Amelia's head snapped up. "Do you want me to?" "No," he said, and the word came out rough. "But I want you to be certain. Once this is done, there is no undoing it. You will be the Duchess of Valemont. Your life will never be your own again, not in the way it was. Every decision, every word, every appearance will be weighed and judged. You will be hated by some simply for existing. Others will try to use you." His gaze held hers. "I need to know you understand that." Amelia considered his warning. It should have terrified her. Perhaps it did. But it also clarified something she had been circling since the night before. "I have spent 2 years being invisible," she said quietly. "I have been the poor relation, the one people look past. I have curtsied to women who pitied me and smiled at men who dismissed me. I have been careful and small and grateful for crumbs." She lifted her chin. "If I am to be hated, let it be for something other than my poverty. Let it be because I dared." Frederick stared at her, and in his expression Amelia saw something kindle, not desire, though perhaps desire was part of it, but something fiercer, admiration. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "I am as strong as I had to be," Amelia corrected. "There is a difference." He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made them warm. "You will fit Valemont better than I do," he said. "The house has always preferred strength to birthright." Before Amelia could respond, a knock came at the door. The innkeeper's wife entered with a tray of tea and bread, her eyes darting between them. She set the tray down with exaggerated care, as though any sudden movement might disturb something fragile. "Will you be staying long, Your Grace?" she asked, and Amelia heard the subtext. "Will you be staying together?" "Until my steward arrives," Frederick replied, offering no further explanation. The woman curtsied again and left, though Amelia suspected she would be listening at the door. Frederick poured tea with the same efficiency he brought to everything. He handed Amelia a cup, and their fingers brushed. This time, neither pulled away immediately. The warmth of his hand lingered against hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Thank you," Amelia said, though she was not certain whether she meant for the tea or something else. They drank in silence, and in that silence, the weight of what they were about to do settled over them like snow. Amelia thought of her mother, who had married for love and still ended up widowed and in debt. She thought of her father, who had loved his family, and still could not save them from ruin. Love, she had learned, was no shield, but honesty, the kind Frederick had promised, that might be something steadier. "Tell me about Valemont," she said, because she needed to fill the quiet with something other than her own fears. Frederick leaned back in his chair, cup cradled in both hands. "It is old," he said. "Built in the 15th century, though parts have been added and rebuilt over the years. The south wing is newer, only 200 years old." A faint, wry smile. "My family has occupied it for 9 generations. Each one has added their burden to the walls." "Is it beautiful?" Amelia asked. He considered. "It is imposing. Whether that is the same as beautiful, I cannot say. The gardens were my mother's project. She planted roses and lavender and made the east terrace into something softer than the house deserved." His expression shadowed. "She died when I was 17. The gardens have been maintained, but they are not the same." Amelia heard the grief beneath his words, old but unhealed. "I am sorry," she said. Frederick nodded once, accepting the sympathy without dwelling on it. "And you?" he asked. "What will you miss from your old life?" Amelia almost laughed. "Very little," she admitted. "My parents are gone. My home was sold. My friends, if I had any, have married or moved on. I will miss—" She paused, searching for something true. "I will miss the freedom to be unnoticed." "You will never be unnoticed again," Frederick said, and it sounded like both a promise and a warning. The morning stretched. They talked in careful increments, revealing pieces of themselves the way one might reveal cards in a game where the stakes were unclear. Frederick spoke of his childhood, of lessons in duty and silence, of a father who had loved the estate more than his son. Amelia spoke of her mother's gentleness, her father's optimism, the slow erosion of comfort into necessity. Neither spoke of love. That remained unspoken, a territory too uncertain to map. At 1:30, the sound of hooves on cobblestone drew them to the window. A carriage had arrived, fine and black, and bearing the Valemont crest on its door. Behind it rode 2 men on horseback, one elderly and severe, the other younger, dressed in the sombre garb of a clergyman. Frederick exhaled slowly. "They're here." Amelia's hands went cold again. She watched as the men dismounted, as the innkeeper rushed out to greet them, as the entire village seemed to pause and take notice. This was it, the moment the decision became irrevocable. Frederick turned to her. "Are you ready?" Amelia wanted to say no. She wanted to say she needed more time, more certainty, more of something she could not name. But she looked at Frederick's face and saw the same fear mirrored there, the same desperate hope that this might be the right kind of mistake. "Yes," she said, and rose to her feet. They descended the stairs together. The innkeeper's wife stared openly now, all pretense of discretion abandoned. In the main room, the steward, Mr. Graves, Amelia assumed, stood waiting with the chaplain. Graves was a man of perhaps 60, with silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested he had spent a lifetime managing other people's crises. His eyes moved over Amelia with sharp assessment, but he said nothing. The chaplain was younger, nervous, clearly uncertain why he had been summoned with such urgency. "Your Grace," Graves said, bowing, "your message was unexpected." "I am aware," Frederick replied. "Mr. Graves, Reverend Alcott, may I introduce Miss Amelia Hartwood? We are to be married. Today." The silence that followed was absolute. Graves's expression barely shifted, but Amelia saw the shock register in the tightness around his eyes. The chaplain paled. "Your Grace," Graves began carefully, "there are arrangements, announcements—" "Which will be made after," Frederick interrupted. "The marriage will take place here within the hour. You will serve as witness, along with the innkeeper. Reverend Alcott will officiate. Is that clear?" Graves looked as though he wished to argue, but years of service had taught him when argument was futile. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." The chaplain swallowed visibly. Yes, of course. If Your Grace wishes—" "I do," Frederick said, and the firmness in his voice left no room for doubt. Amelia stood silent through the exchange, acutely aware that she was being discussed as though she were a piece of urgent business, rather than a bride. Yet she understood the necessity. To delay was to invite interference, scandal, ruin. Speed was their only defense. Graves turned his attention to Amelia, and his gaze was not unkind, merely calculating. "Miss Hartwood," he said, inclining his head, "I trust you are entering this union willingly." It was a pointed question, and Amelia recognized it for what it was. Graves ensuring she could not later claim coercion. She appreciated the precision of it. "I am," she said clearly, "entirely willingly." Graves studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. Reverend, if you would prepare—" The chaplain, still looking as though he had been swept up in a whirlwind, nodded and began pulling a prayer book from his satchel. Frederick leaned close to Amelia, his voice low. "There is still time," he murmured, "if you wish to leave." Amelia looked up at him. His face was tense, guarded, but she saw the vulnerability beneath, the fear that she might indeed walk away and leave him to face the Ashfords and his uncle, and the grinding machinery of expectation alone. "I am not leaving," she whispered back. His eyes searched hers, and whatever he found there seemed to steady him. He straightened and offered her his arm. They were married in the inn's small parlour, with the fire crackling and the rain beginning again outside. The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and formal, spoken by a chaplain who stumbled only twice. Amelia's voice shook when she made her vows, but she made them clearly. Frederick's voice was steady, though his hand trembled faintly when he slid a ring onto her finger, a ring Graves had produced from his pocket, simple gold, likely kept for emergencies. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, Frederick did not kiss her. He simply took her hand and held it, his grip firm and warm. Amelia felt the reality of it settle over her like a cloak, heavy, strange, irrevocable. She was married, she was the Duchess of Valemont, and she did not yet know whether that meant she was saved or lost. Graves stepped forward immediately, all business. "Your Grace, we should return to Valemont at once. There will be questions, preparations. Your uncle—" "My uncle can wait," Frederick said, though there was resignation in it. He looked at Amelia. "We will travel together. The carriage will be more comfortable than the road." Amelia nodded mutely. She had not ridden in a carriage of such quality in years. The thought of it felt surreal, like stepping into a dream someone else was having. The innkeeper was paid handsomely for his discretion, though Amelia knew discretion would last only as long as it took for gossip to reach the next village. The chaplain was sent back with a letter for the parish register. Graves supervised everything with brisk efficiency, his expression revealing nothing of what he thought about his master's sudden, inexplicable marriage. Within the hour, Amelia found herself seated in the Valemont carriage across from Frederick, with Graves riding alongside. The interior was lined with velvet the colour of deep wine, and the seats were so soft she nearly sank into them. Her valise, her one remaining possession from her old life, sat beside her like a shabby guest at a grand table. As the carriage rolled forward, Amelia looked out the window and watched the village recede. She thought of her aunt in Berkshire, still expecting her arrival. She thought of the life she had been travelling toward, now abandoned as completely as the cottage in the storm. Frederick sat across from her in silence, his gaze turned outward. He looked like a man who had just won a battle, but was not yet certain of the war. "What happens now?" Amelia asked quietly. Frederick's eyes shifted to hers. "Now," he said, "we face Valemont, the house, the staff, my uncle, and eventually the world." "In that order?" Amelia attempted lightness, though her stomach churned. A faint smile touched his mouth. "If we are fortunate." They rode in silence for a while, the carriage swaying gently over the improved roads as they moved deeper into Valemont land. The countryside grew more manicured, hedgerows giving way to stone walls, fields to parkland. Amelia saw sheep dotting the hills, a tenant's cottage with smoke rising from the chimney, a cluster of workers who paused to watch the carriage pass. "They will talk," Frederick said, following her gaze. "People always talk," Amelia replied. "Not about me," he said. "Not like this. I have always been predictable, dutiful." His mouth twisted. "Boring, some might say." Amelia looked at him. "You are not boring." He met her eyes, and something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "Neither are you." The words settled into her, unexpected warmth in a cold season. She looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. It fit well enough, though it was clearly not made for her. Another woman's ring, perhaps, or simply kept ready for expediency. "Whose ring is this?" she asked. Frederick glanced at her hand. "My mother's," he said. "Graves keeps the family pieces. I asked for something simple." Amelia's fingers stilled. She wore a dead woman's ring, given in haste. in a marriage arranged by storm and necessity. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like a kind of inheritance, the weight of history passing into her keeping whether she was ready or not. "She would have liked you," Frederick said suddenly. Amelia blinked. "You cannot know that." "I can," he insisted. "She despised pretense. She valued honesty above lineage. You would have reminded her of herself." Amelia did not know what to say to that. The compliment felt too large to accept, yet she sensed Frederick meant it. The carriage turned, and through the window Amelia saw the gates of Valemont, tall, iron, imposing. Beyond them stretched a long drive lined with ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the afternoon light into patterns of shadow and gold. And at the end of the drive, rising from the landscape like something conjured from stone and time, stood Valemont itself. Frederick had called it imposing. That was an understatement. The house sprawled across the horizon, a vast collection of turrets and wings and windows that gleamed like watching eyes. It was beautiful in the way a fortress was beautiful, proud, unyielding, built to endure. Amelia's breath caught. This was to be her home. These walls, these windows, this impossible weight of history. She had gone from a cottage with peeling paint to a place that housed centuries. "It's enormous," she whispered. Frederick followed her gaze. "It's a prison dressed as a palace," he said. Then, softer, "But perhaps we can make it something else." The carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance. Servants appeared as if summoned by invisible signals, footmen in livery, a housekeeper in black, a butler whose expression suggested he had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. They lined up with military precision, waiting. Frederick descended first, then turned to offer Amelia his hand. She took it, her fingers closing around his, and stepped down onto gravel that crunched beneath her worn boots. Every eye fixed on her. She felt their assessment like a physical touch, taking in her plain dress, her lack of jewels, her utter unsuitability. She lifted her chin and met their stares. Frederick did not release her hand. Instead, he turned to the assembled staff and spoke with clear authority. "This is Amelia Hartwood. As of this afternoon, she is my wife and your Duchess. You will accord her every respect and courtesy due to her position. Is that understood?" A ripple of shock passed through the servants, quickly suppressed into professional blankness. The housekeeper, a woman of perhaps 50 with sharp features and sharper eyes, curtsied deeply. "Your Grace," she said to Amelia, and the title sounded strange applied to her. "Welcome to Valemont. I am Mrs. Bridges, the housekeeper. If you require anything—" "She will require chambers prepared," Frederick interrupted. "The Duchess's suite, and a lady's maid assigned to her service immediately." Mrs. Bridges's expression flickered with something, surprise, perhaps calculation, but she nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. At once." They were ushered inside, and Amelia's first impression of Valemont's interior was one of overwhelming grandeur. The entrance hall soared 2 stories high, with a staircase that split and curved like wings. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Halstons staring down with varying degrees of severity. Marble gleamed underfoot. Light poured through tall windows and shattered into rainbows against crystal chandeliers. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. Frederick led her through the hall and into a smaller drawing room where a fire had already been lit. He closed the door behind them, and for the first time since the inn they were alone. Amelia sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The day had been a torrent of decisions and ceremonies and revelations, and now she sat in a palace wearing a dead duchess's ring. Frederick poured brandy from a decanter and handed her a glass. "Drink," he said. She did, and the burn of it steadied her. "I know this is overwhelming," Frederick said, sitting across from her, "but you will have time to learn. Mrs. Bridges is efficient. The staff will help you." Amelia looked at him. "And you?" "I will help you," he said, "as much as I can." A knock sounded before Amelia could respond. Frederick's expression tightened. "Enter." The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, with Frederick's height, but none of his restraint. His face was florid with anger, his eyes bright with it. He strode into the room as though he owned it, which in a sense he believed he did, or should have. "What?" the man demanded without preamble. "Have you done?" Frederick rose slowly. and Amelia saw his entire demeanor shift into something colder, harder. "Uncle Richard," he said, "how kind of you to welcome my wife." The man, Richard Halston, turned his glare on Amelia. She forced herself not to flinch. "Your wife," Richard repeated, voice dripping with contempt. "This is your wife? A nobody from nowhere, married in secret like a criminal?" "Mind your tone," Frederick said, and steel entered his voice. Richard ignored him, advancing on Amelia. "Who are you? What family? What dowry?" Amelia rose, refusing to be looked down upon. "I am Amelia Hartwood," she said clearly. "My family is respectable but without fortune. I bring no dowry. And yes, I married your nephew today." Richard's face purpled. "You little—" "Uncle," Frederick cut in, stepping between them. "You will speak to my wife with respect, or you will not speak at all." Richard whirled on him. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Ashfords will withdraw. The alliance, everything we negotiated, was never mine to negotiate," Frederick said coldly. "I am the Duke of Valemont, not you, and I will marry whom I choose." "You have no choice," Richard roared. "You have debts, responsibilities. You cannot simply—" "I can," Frederick said, "and I have." The two men faced each other, and Amelia saw the years of resentment and control coiled between them. Richard had clearly expected to manage Frederick like a business, to arrange his life according to profit and propriety. Frederick's rebellion, sudden, absolute, had upended everything. "Catherine Ashford was perfect," Richard hissed. "Wealthy, connected, willing because she had no more choice than I did," Frederick shot back. "And I will not trap someone in a marriage I despise simply to ease your political games." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Is that what this is? A tantrum?" Frederick's control cracked just slightly. "It is a marriage. Legal, binding, and final. Now leave my house." "Your house?" Richard's laugh was ugly. "This house stands because of my management." "And my inheritance," Frederick said, "which you will continue to respect unless you wish to be removed from your position as trustee." The threat hung in the air. Richard's face went from purple to pale. He stared at Frederick as though seeing him for the first time, as though the nephew he had controlled had suddenly grown teeth. "You will regret this," Richard said finally, voice low and venomous. "Both of you." He turned and strode from the room, slamming the door behind him hard enough to make the chandelier tremble. Silence rushed in like floodwater. Amelia sat down again, her legs unsteady. Frederick remained standing, staring at the door as though his uncle might return. "I am sorry," he said without looking at her. "For what?" Amelia asked. "For that. For what is to come." He turned, and she saw the strain in his face. "Richard will make this as difficult as possible, and he is not the only one. There will be whispers, accusations. They will question your character, your motives. They will do what people always do," Amelia interrupted. "They will talk. Let them." Frederick stared at her. "You are remarkably calm." "I am terrified," Amelia corrected, "but I have learned that fear does not excuse inaction. If I am to be your wife, I will be her completely. I will learn what I must learn. I will face who I must face." She lifted her chin. "And I will not apologize for existing." Something in Frederick's expression softened, and he crossed to her, kneeling so they were at eye level. He took her hand, the one with the ring, and held it carefully. "You are stronger than I deserve," he said quietly. Amelia's throat tightened. "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Then I will learn," he replied, "as you will learn this place. Together." The word hung between them. Together. It was the first time either had spoken it with something resembling hope. A softer knock came, and Mrs. Bridges entered with a young woman trailing behind her. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said to Amelia, "this is Mary. She will serve as your lady's maid. Your chambers are ready when you wish to retire." Amelia looked at the girl, barely 20, wide-eyed and nervous, and felt a surge of sympathy. Mary was likely as overwhelmed as Amelia herself. "Thank you, Mrs. Bridges," Amelia said, trying the words on. "And thank you, Mary." The girl curtsied so deeply she nearly toppled. Amelia suppressed a smile. Frederick rose, helping Amelia to her feet. "I will have dinner sent to your rooms," he said. "You should rest." Amelia realized with a start that he was giving her space, permission not to face the demands of this new life all at once. It was a kindness she had not expected. "And you?" she asked. "I have letters to write," he said. "Announcements to make, damage to contain," a wry smile. "The work of disappointing people." Amelia followed Mary through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past more portraits and tapestries and rooms whose purposes she could only guess. Finally, they reached a suite of chambers that took her breath away. The bedroom alone was larger than the entire cottage where she and Frederick had sheltered. The bed was canopied in silk, the furniture gleamed, and through tall windows she could see the gardens Frederick had mentioned, his mother's roses, now in their winter sleep. Mary helped her out of her travel-stained dress and into a robe she found in the wardrobe. Soft, clean, impossibly luxurious. A bath was drawn and Amelia sank into water so hot it made her gasp. She scrubbed away the road, the rain, the last traces of the woman she had been yesterday. When she emerged, wrapped in the robe, Mary was laying out a nightgown, fine linen with lace at the cuffs. "Will His Grace be joining you, Your Grace?" Mary asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only careful neutrality. Amelia's cheeks warmed. She had not thought that far. She and Frederick were married, yes, but the marriage had been practical, defensive. The question of intimacy, of what was expected, hovered unspoken. "I do not know," Amelia admitted. Mary nodded as though this were a perfectly reasonable answer, and finished arranging the room. She curtsied once more and left Amelia alone. Amelia sat by the window, looking out at the darkening gardens. Somewhere in this vast house, Frederick was writing letters that would announce their marriage to a world that would not understand it. Somewhere, his uncle was plotting revenge. Somewhere, Catherine Ashford was receiving news that would free her from an unwanted alliance. And here, in this room, Amelia Hartwood, now Amelia Holston, Duchess of Valemount, tried to comprehend the enormity of what she had done. She thought of the storm, of the cottage, of the moment Frederick had made his impossible proposal. She had said yes to survive, but survival was only the beginning. A soft knock drew her from her thoughts. She rose, heart suddenly pounding, and opened the door. Frederick stood in the corridor, still dressed but looking even more exhausted than before. "I should have asked earlier," he said, "but may I come in?" Amelia stepped aside and he entered, his presence making the enormous room feel smaller. He stopped near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that suggested restraint. "I wanted to ensure you are settled," he said. "I am," Amelia replied. "The room is beautiful." "It was my mother's," Frederick said. "I thought, that is, I hoped you would not mind." Amelia looked at him, at the way he held himself so carefully, and understood. He was giving her his mother's rooms, his mother's ring. He was offering her a place in Valemount's history, even as he had upended that history entirely. "I don't mind," she said softly. Frederick nodded, then seemed to hesitate. "There is one thing," he said. "About tonight." Amelia's pulse quickened. "I will not—" He stopped, then started again. "Our marriage was made out of necessity. I will not presume upon you. You have your chambers, I have mine. When, if anything more is to occur between us, it will be your choice." The careful formality of it, the way he granted her autonomy even now, made Amelia's eyes sting. "Thank you," she whispered. He inclined his head. "I will leave you to rest. If you need anything, the bell pull will summon Mary." He turned to go, but Amelia found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Frederick." He paused, looking back. "I know this is not what you wanted," she said, "but I am grateful for your honesty, for—" She gestured helplessly at the room, at everything, "for not making me feel like a mistake." Frederick's expression transformed. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "You are not a mistake," he said fiercely. "You may be the only thing I have chosen correctly in years." Then, before she could respond, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Not a seduction, but something gentler. An acknowledgement. A promise. He released her and left without another word. Amelia stood alone in her new chambers, her hand still warm from his touch, and understood that this marriage, born of storms and necessity and impossible proposals, had already become something neither of them had anticipated, something that might, against all odds, become real. The first week at Valemont passed in a blur of instruction and observation. Amelia woke each morning in her mother-in-law's chambers, still startled by the vastness of the bed, the quality of the linens, the quiet efficiency with which Mary appeared to draw curtains and lay out clothing Amelia had never owned. The wardrobe had been filled overnight, dresses in muted colours, day gowns and evening gowns, all cut for a duchess, though none quite fit her perfectly yet. Mrs. Bridges had summoned a seamstress from the village, who measured Amelia with swift precision and promised alterations within days. Amelia learned the house in increments. The east wing where Frederick's private study overlooked the parkland, the portrait gallery where 9 generations of Holstons watched her pass with painted eyes, the library, 3 stories of books bound in leather, smelling of dust and memory, the conservatory where his mother's touch still lingered in the arrangement of potted palms, and the stone bench positioned to catch morning light. She learned the rhythms, too. Breakfast served at 8. Household accounts reviewed with Mrs. Bridges each Tuesday. The staff's deference that was really assessment, waiting to see if the new Duchess would prove worthy of their loyalty. She felt their eyes constantly, measuring her against the woman who should have stood in her place. Wealthy Catherine Ashford, with her impeccable lineage and substantial dowry. Frederick kept his word about honesty. Each evening, they dined together in the smaller dining room rather than the cavernous formal one that could seat 40. He told her about the estate's business, the tenant disputes, the drainage problems in the South Fields, the negotiations with neighbouring landowners. He asked her opinion, which surprised her at first, then moved her. He listened when she spoke, as though her thoughts mattered even when she had no expertise to offer. But they remained careful with each other. Polite. They had not yet learned how to be alone together, without the armour of courtesy. On the 8th day the letter arrived. Amelia was in the morning room with Mrs. Bridges, reviewing menus, when Mary appeared with a silver tray. "A letter for you, Your Grace," the girl said, her expression carefully neutral. "From London." Amelia recognized the heavy paper, the elegant script. Her stomach tightened as she broke the seal. The letter was from Lady Catherine Ashford herself. "Your Grace, I trust this finds you settled at Valemont. I write not with anger, as you might expect, but with gratitude. Your marriage to the Duke has freed me from an obligation I dreaded, and provided my family with a graceful exit from an alliance neither party truly desired. That said, London is less charitable. My brother speaks of your union with considerable venom, and he is not alone. The rumours have begun, some suggest impropriety, others outright scandal. You will face these whispers when you come to town, as you inevitably must. I thought it fair to warn you. I also write to say this. Frederick Holston is not an easy man, but he is a good one. He deserves someone who will stand beside him rather than merely tolerate him for his title. I hope you prove to be that someone." With unexpected solidarity, Catherine Ashford. Amelia read the letter twice, then set it down with trembling hands. Mrs. Bridges had discreetly withdrawn, leaving her alone with Mary, who hovered uncertainly. "Shall I fetch his Grace, Your Grace?" Mary asked softly. Amelia nodded, not trusting her voice. Frederick arrived within minutes, still in his riding clothes, his hair wind-tangled. He must have come directly from the stables. His eyes went to her face first, reading her distress before she spoke. "What has happened?" he asked. Amelia handed him the letter. She watched his expression harden as he read, particularly at the mention of Catherine's brother and London's rumours. When he finished, he set the letter aside and looked at her with something like resignation. "I had hoped we would have more time," he said, "but it seems the world will not grant it." "More time for what?" Amelia asked. "To prepare you, to build your confidence, to make you unassailable before we face them." Amelia stood, needing movement to contain the anxiety rising in her chest. "I will never be unassailable to them," she said. "I am not what they expected. I am not what they wanted. No amount of preparation will change that." Frederick crossed to her, and for the first time he reached out to touch her, his hand settling on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Then we do not try to make you what they expect," he said. "We make them accept you as you are." "How?" The word came out sharper than intended. "By going to London," Frederick said. "Together. and showing them a united front. Amelia's pulse quickened. When? Within the week. There is a ball, the Devonshire Ball. It is the event of the season. If we attend, if we face them there, the worst of the speculation will exhaust itself in a single night. Amelia thought of ballrooms filled with people who would dissect her every gesture, every word. She thought of Catherine's brother with his venom and her Uncle Richard with his anger and all the faceless masses who would judge her for daring to marry above her station. And if I fail, she whispered. Frederick's hand tightened on her shoulder. You won't. You cannot know that. I know you, he said, and the conviction in his voice startled her. I have watched you this week. You learn quickly. You do not flinch from difficulty. You treat the staff with respect, and they are beginning to respect you in return. Mrs. Bridges told me yesterday that you have a natural authority. His mouth curved faintly. High praise from her. Amelia looked up at him. They stood closer than they had since the cottage, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his grey eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, close enough to feel the heat of him. I am afraid, she admitted. So am I, Frederick said. But we will be afraid together. The word again, together. It was becoming a promise they built, piece by piece. Amelia drew a breath and nodded. Then we go to London. Frederick's expression shifted. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper. His hand slid from her shoulder, but he did not step away immediately. For a moment they stood in shared silence, and Amelia felt the strange intimacy of it, the way crisis was teaching them to lean on each other. There is one more thing, Frederick said quietly. Before we face London, there is something I should give you. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Amelia's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a necklace, sapphires set in silver, antique and exquisite. The stones caught the morning light and held it. It was my mother's, Frederick said. She wore it on formal occasions. I thought, if you are willing, you might wear it to the ball. Amelia stared at the necklace. It was not just jewelry, it was legacy, lineage, the weight of Vallemont's history made tangible. To wear it was to claim her place not just as Frederick's wife, but as part of the family's continuum. Are you certain? She asked. Frederick's gaze held hers. I have never been more certain of anything. He lifted the necklace from the box and stepped behind her. Amelia felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp, gentle and careful. The sapphires settled against her collarbone, cool and heavy. She reached up to touch them, and Frederick's hand steadied hers, his fingers warm over her trembling ones. You look like a duchess, he said softly, so close his breath stirred her hair. Amelia turned and found herself nearly in his arms. The air between them changed, thickened with possibility. She saw him register it too, the way his eyes darkened, the way his jaw tightened. But he did not move closer. He was keeping his promise, letting her choose. Amelia made the choice. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was brief, uncertain, more question than answer. But Frederick responded immediately, his arms coming around her, his mouth warm and sure against hers. The kiss deepened, shifting from tentative to certain, and Amelia felt something unlock in her chest. Not passion alone, though passion was part of it, but recognition. This was her husband, this man who had offered her shelter and honesty, and his mother's jewels. This man who was afraid alongside her. When they broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. Frederick rested his forehead against hers, his hands still at her waist. Amelia, he said, and her name in his voice sounded like discovery. I know, she whispered, though she was not entirely sure what she knew, only that something had shifted between them, from alliance to something unmistakably real. A discreet cough from the doorway broke the moment. Mrs. Bridges stood there, her expression carefully blank, though Amelia suspected she had seen everything. Forgive the interruption, Your Graces, the housekeeper said, but the seamstress has arrived with the finished gowns. Frederick stepped back, smoothing his coat, his composure reasserting itself, though his eyes remained warm. Thank you, Mrs. Bridges, he said. We will be along shortly. When the housekeeper withdrew, Frederick turned back to Amelia. We should attend to the gowns, he said. You will need appropriate attire for London. Amelia nodded, though she felt unsteady, as if the ground had tilted. She touched the sapphires again, needing something solid to anchor her. "Frederick," she said. He paused, waiting. "I am glad I married you," she said, and meant it. His smile, when it came, transformed his entire face. "I am glad I asked," he replied. The preparation for London consumed the next days. Amelia was fitted for gowns in silk and satin, colours deeper and richer than she had ever worn. She practiced dancing with Frederick in the ballroom, learning the steps she had once known but forgotten through disuse. He was a patient teacher, guiding her through waltzes and reels, his hand steady at her waist. "You are thinking too much," he told her, as she stumbled over a turn. "I cannot help it," Amelia replied. "There will be hundreds watching." "Then watch me instead," Frederick said. "Ignore them. Let them fade. It is only us." She tried, and found that when she focused on him, on the pressure of his hand, the rhythm of his steps, the anxiety receded. They moved together with increasing ease, and by the third evening, Mrs. Bridges, watching from the doorway, declared them more than adequate. Frederick also insisted Amelia learn the key players they would encounter. He spent evenings detailing London's social hierarchy, naming the families who mattered and those who merely thought they did. He described Catherine's brother, Lord Edmund Ashford, ambitious and cruel, prone to nursing grievances. He warned her about the gossip columnists who would be watching for scandal. He armed her with knowledge, the way one might arm a soldier before battle. "You make it sound like war," Amelia said one night over dinner. "It is war," Frederick replied, "only fought with smiles and insinuation instead of swords." On the morning of their departure, Amelia stood in her chambers while Mary arranged her hair. The girl had grown more comfortable over the days, offering small observations about the household, teaching Amelia the unspoken rules of Valamont's rhythms. Now she met Amelia's eyes in the mirror with something like sympathy. "You will do splendidly, Your Grace," Mary said. "His Grace would not take you if he did not believe it." Amelia smiled, though nerves fluttered in her stomach. "I hope you are right." The journey to London took most of the day. Amelia and Frederick travelled in the large carriage, Graves accompanying them along with Mary and Frederick's valet. They stopped once at an inn for refreshment, and Amelia noticed how the innkeeper treated Frederick with obsequious deference and eyed her with barely concealed curiosity. Word of their marriage had clearly spread. As the carriage approached London, the landscape transformed from countryside to city. Narrow streets crowding with traffic, buildings pressing close, the smell of smoke and humanity thick in the air. Amelia had been to London before, but always as a visitor of modest means, staying in cheap lodgings and moving through spaces where she would not be noticed. Now she arrived as a duchess, and the city felt different, more predatory. The Valamont townhouse stood in Mayfair, an elegant four-story structure that spoke of old money and older privilege. Servants lined up to greet them, and Amelia endured another round of scrutiny as Frederick introduced her. The housekeeper here, a severe woman named Mrs. Aldridge, curtsied with precision and led Amelia upstairs to chambers that rivaled Valamont's in luxury. "The ball is tomorrow evening, Your Grace," Mrs. Aldridge said. "If there is anything you require—" "Nothing for now," Amelia said, though her mind raced with 100 needs she could not name. That night, lying alone in the unfamiliar bed, Amelia could not sleep. She heard the city outside, the rattle of carriages, the distant shouts, the ceaseless hum of life that never quieted. She thought of the ballroom that awaited her, the faces that would judge her, the whispers that would follow. A soft knock came at the connecting door, the door that led to Frederick's chambers. She sat up as it opened, and Frederick appeared, dressed in a banyan, his hair loose around his face. "I saw your light," he said. "You cannot sleep." "No," Amelia admitted. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, careful to maintain distance yet offering presence. "Tell me what you are thinking," he said. Amelia drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I am thinking that tomorrow night I will be unveiled before people who already hate me. I am thinking that I do not know how to be what they expect. I am thinking—" She stopped, voice breaking slightly. "I am thinking I may fail you." Frederick reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You could never fail me," he said. But even if you stumbled, even if you said the wrong thing or wore the wrong dress or committed some unforgivable breach of etiquette, I would still be proud to stand beside you." Amelia's eyes stung. "Why?" "Because you are brave," Frederick said simply. "You married a stranger to survive. You walked into Valemont and faced my uncle without flinching. You learned an entirely new life in a matter of days. That is not failure, Amelia. That is courage." She looked at their joined hands, hers smaller, rougher from years of managing without servants. His larger, bearing a ducal signet that represented power she could barely fathom. Yet in this moment, they were simply two people clinging to each other in the dark. "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I am terrified." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Frederick said. "It is action despite it." He lifted her hand and kissed her palm, the gesture intimate and tender. Then, without asking, he shifted to sit beside her against the headboard, his arm settling around her shoulders. Amelia leaned into him, grateful for the solid warmth of his presence. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, simply breathing in tandem. Gradually, Amelia felt the knot of anxiety in her chest loosen. She would face tomorrow because she had to, but she would not face it alone. "Stay," she said quietly. Frederick went still. "Amelia, not for... I only mean..." She struggled for words. "I do not want to be alone tonight." He understood. His arm tightened around her. "Then I will stay." They lay down together, still fully clothed, still careful. Frederick held her as sleep finally came to claim her, and when Amelia woke in the grey morning light, she found him still there, his breathing deep and even, his face softened by rest. She studied him in the quiet, this man who had become her husband, her ally, and now something more than either. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, and his eyes opened, meeting hers. "Good morning," he murmured. "Good morning," she replied. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man waking beside someone he wanted to wake beside. Then reality reasserted itself, and he sat up, running a hand through his disordered hair. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," Amelia agreed. They spent the day in preparation. Amelia bathed, her hair washed and arranged in an elaborate style that took Mary 2 hours to perfect. The gown chosen for the evening was midnight blue silk that brought out the sapphires Frederick had given her. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman reflected there looked like someone who belonged in a ballroom, someone who might be a duchess. But beneath the silk and jewels, she was still Amelia Hartwood, the girl who had walked alone in a storm, the woman who had said yes to an impossible proposal. Frederick came to escort her down, and when he saw her, he stopped in the doorway. "You are breathtaking," he said, and the reverence in his voice made her cheeks warm. "You do not look entirely terrible yourself," Amelia replied, and he laughed, a real laugh that eased the tension coiling in her stomach. The carriage ride to Devonshire House felt simultaneously endless and too brief. Frederick held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. "Remember," he said as they approached, "you are my Duchess. You have every right to be there. Let them whisper. Let them judge. It changes nothing." Amelia nodded, though her heart hammered so hard she thought it might escape her chest. They descended from the carriage and joined the queue of guests ascending the grand staircase. Around them, Amelia felt eyes turning, whispers rippling. She kept her chin high, her hand steady on Frederick's arm. They reached the receiving line where the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire greeted guests. The Duchess, a formidable woman known for her influence, took in Amelia with one shrewd glance. "Your Graces," she said, and Amelia heard the weight behind the plural. "How delightful. We have heard such interesting things about your recent nuptials." "I trust you believe only the most scandalous," Frederick replied smoothly. "We should hate to disappoint." The Duchess's mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Welcome, Duchess Valemont. I look forward to furthering our acquaintance." It was acceptance, however grudging. Amelia murmured her thanks, and they moved into the ballroom. The space took Amelia's breath away. Chandeliers blazed overhead, casting golden light across hundreds of guests in silks and jewels. Music played, a waltz that seemed to rise and fall like breathing, and everywhere, eyes turned toward them. Frederick led her through the room with unhurried grace. He introduced her to lords and ladies, whose names she tried desperately to remember. Some were kind, others coldly polite. A few cut them entirely, turning away with deliberate rudeness. Each slight landed like a small blow, but Frederick's hand remained steady at her back, anchoring her. Then they encountered Lord Edmund Ashford. He stood near the refreshment table with a cluster of young men who fell silent as Frederick and Amelia approached. Edmund was perhaps 35, handsome in a cruel way, with his sister Catherine's colouring but none of her grace. His eyes raked over Amelia with open contempt. "Vallemont," he said, not bothering with courtesy. "And the infamous new Duchess. How fortuitous to encounter you." "Ashford," Frederick replied, voice flat. Edmund's smile was all teeth. "I must congratulate you on your hasty marriage. My sister sends her regards, by the way. She is remarkably sanguine about being cast aside for a woman of no breeding and less fortune." Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Frederick's voice cut across Edmund's before she could speak. "Your sister," Frederick said coldly, "has more grace and intelligence than you will ever possess. She understands what you clearly do not, that I will not be dictated to by small men with large ambitions." Edmund's face darkened. "Mind your words, Vallemont. You may be a duke, but you are not above consequence." "Neither are you," Frederick replied, "and if you speak of my wife with such disrespect again, you will discover exactly what consequences a duke can bring to bear." The threat hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Around them, guests had begun to notice the confrontation, a hush spreading through nearby conversations. Edmund saw it too, saw that he was being publicly challenged and could either retreat or escalate. He chose retreat, though his expression promised future retribution. "Enjoy your evening," he said, each word dripping venom, and turned away. Frederick's jaw remained tight, but he guided Amelia away smoothly. "I apologize," he said quietly. "That was unpleasant." "You defended me," Amelia said, still processing what had happened. "Of course I did," Frederick replied, as if it were the most natural thing. "You are my wife." The music shifted to a waltz, and Frederick turned to her. "Dance with me," he said. "Let them see us together." Amelia let him lead her onto the dance floor. As they began to move, she became acutely aware of the eyes watching, hundreds of them, assessing, judging, gossiping. But Frederick's hand was warm at her waist, his guidance sure, and gradually the faces blurred into background. "Look at me," he murmured, echoing his words from their practice sessions at Vallemont. Amelia did. She met his eyes and found steadiness there, a quiet certainty that she was beginning to trust. "They are still staring," she said. "Let them," Frederick replied. "They will tire of it eventually. Scandal is only interesting until the next one arrives." They turned through the waltz, and Amelia felt something shift in her, a subtle letting go of the fear that had gripped her since London. She would never be what these people expected. She would be judged, whispered about, perhaps even hated by some. But she was dancing with her husband in a ballroom filled with light, wearing his mother's sapphires, and she had survived the worst of their scrutiny. When the waltz ended, Frederick did not immediately release her. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize, something tender beneath the aristocratic composure. "You are magnificent," he said quietly. Before Amelia could respond, another voice interrupted. "Your Grace? Might I have a word?" They turned to find Lady Catherine Ashford standing nearby, elegant in pale green silk. Her expression was difficult to read, not hostile, but cautious. Frederick stiffened slightly, but Catherine addressed Amelia directly. "I wondered if we might speak privately, Duchess Vallemont, just for a moment." Amelia glanced at Frederick, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course," Amelia said. Catherine led her to a small alcove away from the crowds. For a moment they stood in silence, two women connected by a marriage that never happened and one that did. "I wanted to tell you in person," Catherine said finally, "that I am grateful. I know that sounds strange, but it is true. My brother is furious, yes, and he will make trouble where he can. But you freed me from a life I did not want." Amelia studied the other woman. "Did you love him?" she asked. "Frederick?" Catherine smiled faintly. "I respected him. I pitied him in a way, trapped as I was trapped. But love?" She shook her head. That was never part of our arrangement. Our marriage would have been a business transaction. Her eyes searched Amelia's face. But yours is different, I think. He looks at you as he never looked at me. Amelia's throat tightened. We barely know each other. And yet, Catherine said gently, you chose each other. That is more than most of us ever have. She reached out and squeezed Amelia's hand briefly, then returned to the ballroom, leaving Amelia alone with the weight of her words. When Amelia rejoined Frederick, he was waiting exactly where she had left him, as if he would not move until she returned. What did she say? He asked. That I freed her, Amelia replied, and that you look at me differently. Frederick's expression shifted. Do I? Do you? Amelia countered. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Yes, he said, because you are different. You look back. The evening wore on. They danced twice more, conversed with guests who ranged from curious to cutting, and navigated the complex social currents with Frederick's expertise and Amelia's growing confidence. By midnight, exhaustion weighted her limbs, but she had survived. More than survived, she had claimed her place, however contested. As their carriage pulled away from Devonshire House, Frederick wrapped his coat around Amelia's shoulders against the night chill. She leaned against him and he did not pull away. You were remarkable tonight, he said. I was terrified tonight, Amelia corrected. Both can be true, Frederick replied. They rode in comfortable silence until the townhouse came into view. As they prepared to descend, Frederick caught her hand. Amelia, he said, and something in his tone made her look up. I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened. What? He seemed to struggle for words, this man who was always so controlled. Finally, he said, this marriage began as necessity. Survival, as I called it. But somewhere between the cottage and tonight, it became something else for me. He lifted her hand, pressed it to his chest where she could feel his heart beating. You became something else, not just my Duchess, not just my wife, but someone I... He stopped, as if the words were too dangerous. Amelia understood. She felt it too. The shift from alliance to affection, from strategy to something that frightened her with its intensity. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. Frederick's eyes closed briefly, as if her admission released something he had been holding back. When he opened them again, the careful distance he maintained had vanished entirely. May I kiss you? He asked, though they were married, though they had kissed before. He was asking for permission, not as husband to wife, but as man to woman. Yes, Amelia said. He kissed her in the carriage beneath the London stars, and it was nothing like their first tentative kiss at Valemont. This was hunger and certainty, recognition and promise. Amelia's hands came up to frame his face, and he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they broke apart, Frederick rested his forehead against hers. Come to my chambers tonight, he said. Not because you are afraid, not because you are lonely, but because you want to. Amelia's pulse raced. She understood what he was asking, not just for physical intimacy, though that was part of it, but for a true beginning to their marriage. For a choice made not from necessity, but from desire. Yes, she said again, and felt the word reshape everything. They entered the townhouse separately, maintaining propriety before the servants. But an hour later, when Amelia knocked softly on the connecting door, Frederick opened it immediately as if he had been waiting. He wore only a shirt and trousers, his formality stripped away, and in the candlelight he looked younger, more vulnerable. Amelia stepped inside, and he closed the door behind her. Are you certain? He asked. I am certain, Amelia replied, and went to him. What passed between them that night was private, sacred, the kind of intimacy that rewrote two lives into one shared story. Frederick was gentle, patient, attentive to every hesitation and every response. Amelia discovered that desire could coexist with tenderness, that passion did not require performance. They learned each other slowly, mapping unfamiliar territory with care. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Amelia's head on Frederick's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I did not expect this, Frederick said quietly. Any of it. The storm, the cottage, you. Neither did I, Amelia replied. I thought I was travelling to my aunt's house." Frederick laughed softly. "Instead, you became a duchess." "Instead, I became your wife," Amelia corrected, and felt him tighten his arms around her. They fell asleep like that, and when morning came, Amelia woke to find Frederick watching her with an expression that made her chest ache, not with pain, but with fullness, with the recognition of something she had stopped believing possible. "I think I am falling in love with you," he said, as if the confession had been waiting all night. Amelia reached up and cupped his face. "I think I fell in love with you the night you made your impossible proposal." Frederick kissed her, slow and deep, and when they finally rose to face the day, they did so as something they had not been before. A true partnership, chosen and real. The weeks that followed were not easy. Lord Edmund continued to spread rumours. Uncle Richard remained hostile. Society's whispers persisted, though they gradually lost their venom as newer scandals emerged to capture attention. But Frederick and Amelia faced each challenge together, learning the rhythm of marriage, negotiating the balance between public duty and private truth. They returned to Valemount in early spring, and Amelia discovered the gardens coming to life, her mother-in-law's roses unfurling in shades of pink and cream. She walked the paths with Frederick, planning additions and changes, claiming the space as her own. Mrs. Bridges reported that the staff had accepted her fully. Mary confided that the housemaids spoke of her with respect. Tenants began bringing their concerns to her, as well as to Frederick, recognizing her authority. One evening, as they sat in the library with Frederick reading correspondence and Amelia reviewing household accounts, he looked up suddenly. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Saying yes that night?" Amelia set down her pen and met his eyes. "No," she said. "Do you regret asking?" "Never," Frederick replied. "Though I regret that I cannot remember the exact moment I fell in love with you. I think it happened gradually, then all at once." Amelia smiled. "I can tell you the moment for me." "When?" "When you knelt in the cottage and asked if I wanted to leave," she said. "You gave me a choice when you could have demanded. That was when I knew you were someone I could love." Frederick crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. They stood like that in the library's warm light, two people who had been strangers a few months ago, and were now the center of each other's lives. "The storm brought us together," Frederick murmured into her hair. "The storm gave us shelter," Amelia replied. "We did the rest." Years would pass. They would face more challenges, financial pressures, social obligations, the eventual birth of children who would carry Valemount into the next generation. But they would face everything together, building a marriage not on necessity, but on the foundation they had forged in a cottage during a storm and strengthened through honesty, courage, and the decision to choose each other every day. Some storms did not pass. They rewrote lives. They transformed destinies. And in the case of Frederick Halston, Duke of Valemount, and Amelia Hartwood, who became his Duchess, the storm had not destroyed them. It had made them whole. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart the way Amelia and Frederick's journey touched mine in the telling, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to subscribe to Echoes of Romance. Your support means the world. It allows us to keep bringing you stories of love that endures, courage that transforms, and the kind of romance that reminds us why we believe in happy endings. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts about Amelia and Frederick's story. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and activate the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Until we meet again in the next story, may you find your own kind of shelter in life's storms.